Women Who Won World War II. Three Untold Stories. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor, America enters World War II. Within weeks, millions of men ship out to fight across Europe and the Pacific. But this creates a massive problem. Who's going to build the planes, the tanks, the bombs? Who's going to break the enemy's codes? Who's going to fight in the skies over the Eastern Front? The answer shocked the world, and it changed history forever. Today, I'm going to tell you three stories, three groups of women who didn't just support the war effort, they won the war. And most people have never heard the full story. This is about the women who built the arsenal of democracy, the women who flew into the night to terrorize the Nazis, and the women who cracked the unbreakable code. Let's begin. Part 1. Rosie the Riveter and the Women Who Built the Weapons. January 1942. The United States faces an impossible challenge. President Roosevelt has promised to build 60,000 aircraft in 1 year. 60,000. To put that in perspective, the entire American aircraft industry built only 6,000 planes the year before. But there is a bigger problem: the workforce. 16 million American men would eventually serve in uniform. That leaves factories, shipyards, and munitions plants desperately short of workers. The government launches a propaganda campaign with a simple message: women, your country needs you. And 6 million women answered the call. Rose Will Monroe, the real Rosie. Let me introduce you to Rose Will Monroe. She's a 29-year-old widow from Kentucky with 2 young daughters. Her husband died in a car accident just before the war started. She is driving a taxi to make ends meet. Then she sees the poster. We can do it! In 1942, Rose moves to Michigan and gets a job at the Willow Run Bomber Plant, the largest factory building in the world at the time. It's so big it has its own zip code. Her job? Building B-24 Liberator bombers. These are 4-engine heavy bombers. Sophisticated machines with over 450,000 rivets each. And Rose has never used a rivet gun in her life. Within weeks, she's working on the assembly line. Within months, she's one of the fastest riveters in the plant. She's so good that when the government makes a promotional film, they cast her as Rosie the Riveter. But here's what makes this story remarkable. Rose isn't unique. She's one of hundreds of thousands of women doing the exact same thing. The numbers that won the war. Let's talk about what these women actually accomplished. Between 1940 and 1945, American women built 300,000 aircraft, constructed 2,000 ships, manufactured 41 billion rounds of ammunition, produced 12 million rifles and carbines. They weren't just doing light work. They were welding, riveting, operating cranes, driving forklifts, and assembling complex machinery. At the peak of production, women made up 65% of the workforce in the aviation industry. 2 out of every 3 people building American warplanes were women. Think about D-Day, June 6, 1944. Allied forces land on the beaches of Normandy with overwhelming air superiority. Those planes, providing cover, built by women. The B-17 flying fortresses bombing Nazi factories, built by women. The ammunition that liberated Paris, Rome, and Berlin, made by women. Dangers they faced, but this work wasn't safe, not even close. Munitions factories were among the most dangerous workplaces in America. Women were handling explosives powerful enough to level city blocks. One mistake, one spark, and dozens could die. The Port Chicago disaster in 1944 killed 320 people instantly, the largest domestic loss of life during the war. Many were women loading ammunition. Factory accidents were common. Loose clothing could get caught in machinery. Chemical exposure caused illness. The work was exhausting. Many women worked 60-hour weeks. Ann Waldner worked at the Radford Arsenal in Virginia, making explosives. She wrote in her diary, "My hands shake at the end of every shift, not from fear, but from handling these deadly materials for 12 hours straight. But I think of my brother in the Pacific, and I come back the next day." These women knew the risks. They came anyway. The legacy. Here's the thing nobody talks about. These women didn't just build weapons. They shattered every assumption about what women could do. Before the war, women were told they were too weak for factory work, too emotional for precision tasks, not smart enough for technical jobs. By 1945, they'd proven all of that was nonsense. They could weld as well as any man. They could operate complex machinery. They could work in dangerous conditions. They could do anything. And then the war ended. Most of these women were fired to make room for returning servicemen. Rose Monroe went back to driving. Many women returned to being housewives. The factory jobs disappeared. But something had changed. These women knew what they were capable of. Their daughters knew. Their granddaughters knew. The women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s didn't come from nowhere. It came from a generation of women who'd built the arsenal of democracy and refused to forget what they'd accomplished. When someone tells you that women can't do something, remember, women built the weapons that won World War II. Part 2. The Night Witches. Terror from the Sky. The Unlikely Pilots. June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany launches Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. 4 million Axis troops pour into the Soviet Union. The Soviet Air Force is caught completely off guard. In the first few weeks, they lose thousands of aircraft. The Luftwaffe dominates the skies. Stalin is desperate. He needs pilots, lots of them. And that's when Marina Raskova steps forward. Raskova is already a legend in the Soviet Union, a record-breaking pilot, a hero of the Soviet Union. And she has a radical proposal: let women fly combat missions. The Soviet military leadership is skeptical. Women pilots in combat against the Luftwaffe? But Stalin approves it. He has no choice. By October 1941, 3 all-female aviation regiments are formed. Over 400 women volunteers flood in: pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers. One of these regiments would become legendary, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The Germans would call them the Nachthexen, the Night Witches, the Impossible Planes. Here's where this story gets crazy. The planes they were given? Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes. These weren't military aircraft. They were crop dusters, training planes, made of plywood and canvas. Let me describe what these women were flying into combat. Maximum speed, 94 miles per hour. No radio communication, no parachutes, too much. Weight, no guns, too heavy. No armor plating. Open cockpit, meaning freezing cold at altitude. Maximum bomb load, 6 bombs of 100 kilograms each. German fighters flew at 300+ miles per hour. German anti-aircraft guns could shred these canvas planes with a single burst. By every logical measure, these women should have been wiped out in their first week. Instead, they became one of the most effective bomber units on the Eastern Front. The tactics that terrified the Germans. So how did they survive? They became ghosts. Here's how a typical Night Witch's mission worked. Night falls. The regiment receives a target, a German supply depot, artillery position, or troop concentration. The women climb into their planes wearing their standard issue uniforms, which are men's uniforms several sizes too large, with rags stuffed in the boots to make them fit. They take off in darkness. As they approach the target, they do something extraordinary. They cut the engine. Complete silence. A biplane made of wood and canvas gliding through the night sky. No engine noise, no radio chatter, nothing. The only sound is the wind whistling through the wing struts. The Germans described it as sounding like a witch's broomstick swooshing through the air. Then, boom, bombs, explosions, chaos. By the time the Germans figured out where the attack came from, the Night Witches were gone, restarting their engines and disappearing into the darkness. And they didn't fly one mission per night. They flew multiple missions, 8, 10, sometimes 15 sorties in a single night. Land, refuel, rearm, take off again. The Germans were terrified. You can't fight an enemy you can't see. You can't shoot down a plane you can't hear. Night after night, these attacks continued. The heroes. Let me tell you about Nadezhda Popova. She joined the Night Witches at age 19. By the end of the war, she had flown 852 combat missions. 852. Her plane was shot down multiple times. On one mission, she counted 42 bullet holes in her aircraft when she landed. She kept flying. She once said, "It was difficult, of course. You had to imagine that you're already dead. Then nothing frightened you." Or consider Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the commander of the regiment. She flew throughout the entire war, leading her squadron through some of the fiercest fighting on the Eastern Front. Under her command, the 588th flew over 23,000 combat sorties. And the Germans? They feared the Night Witches so much that any Luftwaffe pilot who shot one down was automatically awarded the Iron Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. Think about that. Shooting down a single Night Witch was considered such a significant achievement that it earned you the same medal as capturing an entire enemy position. The cost and the victory. The Night Witches paid a heavy price for their success. 32 of the regiment's pilots were killed in action. Every one of them knew the risks. Every one of them kept flying. By the time the war ended, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had flown 23,000-plus combat missions, dropped 3,000 tons of bombs, destroyed countless German positions, never lost a single night to weather or combat stand-downs. 23 members of the regiment were awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the country. But here's the tragedy. After the war, nobody believed their story. It seemed too incredible. Women flying wooden biplanes against the Luftwaffe? Impossible. It wasn't until the Soviet archives opened decades later that the world learned the truth. The Night Witches weren't a myth. They were real, and they were extraordinary. Part 3. The Code Breakers of Bletchley Park. The Unbreakable Code, 1940. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. France has fallen. The Luftwaffe is bombing London. German U-boats are sinking supply convoys in the Atlantic. Britain is losing. Badly. And there's a reason why. The Enigma machine. The Enigma was a cipher device that encrypted all German military communications. It was considered unbreakable, and for good reason. The number of possible settings was 158 quintillion. That's 158 with 54 zeros after it. To put that in perspective, if every person on Earth tried a different combination every second, it would take longer than the age of the universe to try them all. The Germans believed their communications were completely secure. They were wrong. The secret, 50 miles north of London, hidden behind barbed wire and security checkpoints, was a Victorian mansion called Bletchley Park. This is where Britain assembled its code-breaking team. Mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, crossword puzzle experts, anyone who could think in complex patterns. By 1944, over 10,000 people worked at Bletchley Park. 75% of them were women. When we think of Bletchley Park, we think of Alan Turing, the brilliant mathematician who helped design the machines that broke Enigma. And Turing was brilliant, but he didn't work alone. Thousands of women were working alongside him, doing the actual work of code breaking, and most of their names were forgotten. Until now. Joan Clark, the cryptanalyst. Joan Clark graduated from Cambridge University with top honors in mathematics. In most times, she would have become a professor, but this was 1940, and Cambridge didn't award full degrees to women yet. So she took her brilliant mathematical mind to Bletchley Park. She was assigned to Hut 8, Alan Turing's section, working on German naval codes. At first, she was classified as a linguist because the civil service didn't have a job category for female cryptanalysts. But within months, her talent was undeniable. She was promoted to cryptanalyst, a position almost never given to women. She worked directly with Turing, solving complex mathematical problems that seemed impossible. The work was grueling. They were working against the clock. Every day the codes weren't broken, more ships sank, more sailors died. Joan would later say, "We didn't think of ourselves as making history. We thought of ourselves as trying to end a war." The naval codes Joan helped break changed the Battle of the Atlantic. U-boats were no longer invisible. Convoys could be routed around wolf packs. Supply lines stayed open. Britain survived, in large part because of Joan Clark and women like her. The 8,000 invisible women. But Joan Clark is just one story. There were 8,000 women at Bletchley Park, and each one played a crucial role. The Wrens, members of the Women's Royal Naval Service, operated the huge bomb machines that tested Enigma settings. These machines were loud, hot, and required constant attention. The Wrens worked in shifts around the clock, feeding in settings, monitoring results. Other women worked as cryptanalysts, translators, and intelligence analysts. They decrypted messages, identified patterns, and pieced together the bigger picture of German operations. And here's the extraordinary part. They couldn't tell anyone. They signed the Official Secrets Act. They couldn't tell their families what they did. They couldn't tell their friends. Many couldn't even tell their husbands after the war. Some women worked at Bletchley Park for years, doing vital work, and when people asked what they did during the war, they could only say, "Oh, just secretarial work." They kept this secret for 30 years. The British government didn't declassify Bletchley Park's work until 1974. Imagine keeping the most important accomplishment of your life secret for 3 decades. The impact. So what did these women accomplish? Historians estimate that the code breaking at Bletchley Park shortened World War II by at least 2 years. Maybe more. 2 years. That's millions of lives saved. That's the Holocaust ending sooner. That's families reunited years earlier. And 75% of the people who made that possible were women. They didn't fly planes. They didn't storm beaches. They sat in cold huts, working through mathematical problems that would make your head spin, and they won the war. So what have we learned today? We learned that women built the weapons that armed democracy. Every third plane in the sky was built by women who'd never held a wrench before the war started. We learned that women flew into the night in wooden planes to terrorize the most powerful military in the world, and succeeded. We learned that women broke the unbreakable code and shortened the war by years. These women weren't given these opportunities. They fought for them. They proved they could do jobs everyone said were impossible for women. And then, when the war ended, history tried to forget them. But we won't forget. Not anymore. The next time someone tells you what women can't do, remember the women who won World War II. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. There are thousands of untold stories from history, and we're going to keep telling them. Until next time, remember, heroes don't always get remembered, but that doesn't make them any less heroic.